Fear is an emotion that we have a funny relationship with. While usually interpreted as a negative feeling, we like to experiment with this sensation and often even seek it out as a form of entertainment. The entire horror genre is built on that basic idea. I've been a consumer of this type of content for most of my life, and because of obsessively exposing myself to it for as long as I can remember, there isn't much out there that really gets under my skin anymore. However, every now and then, I come across a piece of media that shocks me to my core, that leaves me reeling for days trying to process what I've just seen or heard. The 6th studio album by electro-industrial founders Skinny Puppy is without a doubt the most terror-inducing musical project I know of, reflecting horrors of the universe that question the heart of existence itself. In the spirit of Halloween, whether or not it's come and gone by the time I've uploaded this, I thought I'd cover what is, in my opinion, the granddaddy of spooky albums. This is Too Dark Park. Skinny Puppy started as the side project of Vancouver, BC native Kevin Crompton, who in the early 80s was already a member of the successful new wave band Images in Vogue. However, after being introduced to industrial music like Throbbing Gristle and Cabaret Voltaire, Crompton started to envision his own project, one that would combine the dark, cataclysmic aesthetics of industrial music with the club music that he was already making. When Images in Vogue relocated to Toronto, Crompton stayed behind and made the newly christened Skinny Puppy his full-time project. He recruited Kevin Ogilvy, a friend he met at a party, to record vocals on the tracks he had composed. The duo teamed up with local producer Rave Ogilvy, who would become synonymous with Skinny Puppy and an unofficial core member, and issued their EP Remission in 1984. This is when the band ran into a problem. 2 out of 3 of their main members were named Kevin, and their singer and producer had the same last name even though they're not related. To get around this confusing mess of names, the band decided to adopt pseudonyms. Kevin Ogilvy flipped around his first name and went by Nivek Ogre. Kevin Crompton kept his name but changed the spelling and went by Kevin Key, and Dave Ogilvy just kept his name. From the very start, Skinny Puppy were trailblazers, being the origin point and largely the face of the electro-industrial genre. But they really stepped up their game with the addition of keyboardist Dwayne Gettles in 1986. His classical piano training and extensive knowledge of tech and sampling kept Skinny Puppy at the cutting edge of their genre, resulting in an extremely solid run of records throughout the 80s and culminating in the release of what many fans and critics consider to be their magnum opus, Too Dark Park. To say this record sounds haunting would be an understatement. In fact, the band, already the standard for horror-inflicted dance music up to that point, was noticing that the material they were crafting for this project was becoming quote-unquote really dark, even for them, and this is what inspired the name of the record. Some of the phrases that have been used by critics to describe this album are frightening, forceful and consistently abrasive, similar to a mental disorder, controlled chaos at its most unsettling, and a nightmarish vortex. Nivek Ogre described the underlying concept in his own words as, "That feeling of going down a road with the knowledge that you're breaking down, yet you continue to travel down that road." The record incorporates many elements of Skinny Puppy's previous works, such as massive pounding dance beats, aggressive synths and vocals, samples from horror movies, and themes related to the destruction of humanity and human destruction of the environment. They're particularly militant about that last topic, and to get across their message would perform the tour for this record drenched in animal blood. Yeah, these guys are crazy. However, Too Dark Park is much more grand in scope and musically complex than any of the band's previous material, and for the purposes of this video, I think it could be helpful to compare it to another legendary industrial record, and that is 9 Inch Nails' The Downward Spiral. Both of these records document the destruction of a human life from the inside out. And The Downward Spiral, I think, is seen as the benchmark for depicting mental deterioration in musical form. What could possibly do it better, right? Well, that album has the advantage of being made 4 years after Too Dark Park, which is a massive difference. The early 90s were the formative years of modern dance music, and 1994 is a different universe than 1990. You can still hear the 80s majorly in certain sections of Too Dark Park. However, I'm going to argue that Too Dark Park is actually the more potent of the two projects. Not necessarily better, because that's a matter of opinion, but more potent. To use movies as an example, because that's just what I do, it's so easy. Comparing these two records is kind of like comparing the movie Halloween, right, to something like Cannibal Holocaust. We're comparing an intense but still palatable and digestible album for most people to the scary, unhinged underground. And I think as far as reflecting mental deterioration goes, The Underworld serves that purpose better. In a lot of ways, these two records represent the two paths that industrial music had the option of taking around this time, toward mainstream acceptance or toward refusal to compromise its vision. It obviously went the way of the mainstream, as all new genres eventually do, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But this Skinny Puppy record represents the other direction it could have gone, with still great production value but preserving the antithetical ferocity that the early industrial pioneers envisioned. Here is the grading rubric for this review as usual. Mr. Incredible becoming canny. The cannier he is, the better the song. And let's get into this. The first track is called Convulsion. Yeah, this record is not playing around. This song is sort of a song, it has a cadence, but it's more of a sound picture to welcome you to the record with the most disturbing 3.5 minutes of your life. And to give you an idea of the sound picture that they're creating, imagine your city is being carpet bombed while you are undergoing a violent surgical procedure inside some kind of demented factory. Whatever feeling you got from me saying that, double it and now you're beginning to approach the effect that this song has. I cannot overstate the shock of hearing this. The track starts out quietly with some ominous sound effects, which were apparently taken from the infamous Eroguro anime Legend of the Overfiend. I'm not going to be the one to explain to you what that is, but just know it is very in line with the horrific monstrosity that they wanted to create with this song. The sound effects then start pitch shifting upward like the come up of some terrible bad trip. Suddenly there's a jarring crash, and a sample is played from the documentary LSD-25. He's seeing monsters, he's losing his mind, and he feels it going. That's when they slam you with a punishing mechanical beat that sounds more like rhythmic thunder strikes than a beat. And then all hell breaks loose for the rest of the song. I'm going to attempt to summarize what is happening here. The screeches and machine noises that swirl around in this hurricane of insanity are often hard to tell from the shrieks of humans and animals, the implication being that this sonic body is biomechanical. It's a sickening, perverted mass of flesh and machine with pulsating organs and a beating heart and the capacity to witness and experience its own pain, to be conscious of its own torment. Metal guitars chug to uncommon accents of the beat. It all has a cadence, like I said, but it's very off-kilter and dizzying, which adds to the extreme uneasiness. While the chaos could very easily become indistinguishable from itself, Dave Ogilvy's production here is phenomenal and manages to separate out all of it, so that every sound is crisp and not a single aspect of the terror is muddled or drowned out. After the full breadth of this nightmare has been revealed, Nivek Ogre's vocals come in, a towering version of his nasal snarl, spitting out fragments of cosmic horrors that threaten to describe what all this insanity could mean. The lyrics on this album, to use yet another movie comparison, function kind of like the cursed videotape from my favorite horror movie of all time, Ring, or The Ring, since you've probably seen the American version. In the movie, there's a cursed videotape containing a series of cryptic, disturbing images that are basically the projected rage of a psychic girl named Sadako after she was killed by her father. That's exactly what this album does lyrically. It presents fractured, ambiguous allusions to terrors of the universe and the human mind, which I think is a lot more effective than it would have been if Skinny Puppy had been more straightforward with their writing. Some of the lines he repeats are "Heaven's trash," "Mass direction," "The shores of Pluto," which might be my favorite line in this whole album, that is so evocative, and the phrases "downward" and "hate disease." After about 3.5 minutes of whirling around in this cyclone, the track ends somewhat abruptly, the same way that a natural disaster is suddenly over and you're left stranded in the wreckage. I know I said in my Aphex Twin review, Selected Ambient Works Volume 2, that some of the tracks on that record were disturbing to me. This is a whole other level of fear. This manages to describe the abominations that occur when the order of creation is mangled and chaos reigns. And for that reason, I think this is a 10, right off the bat. The effect of this song, and the sound design specifically, could not be any more powerful than it is. This set out to be the most extreme audio recording ever made, and it murdered its goal. Overkill. The band could not have made a more brave start to their record that they must have known would drive away all but the most devoted fans, and I respect the hell out of them for it. This is the realest depiction of extreme mental turmoil that you will ever hear, the type of thing that only personal desperation could produce. Track 2 is the first real song on the record, and it's called Tormentor. Once again, the band isn't playing around with their titles. I love how vivid they are throughout this whole project. This song has an incredibly kinetic and propulsive dance beat. Give it to another band to add a poppy upbeat melody and you might have had a bona fide hit. But this is Skinny Puppy and they're going to take it in the complete opposite direction. There's enough industrial menace and horror packed into this song that our dog ran upstairs when I was playing it out loud for this review. True story. And just like the last track, because of the odd and creeping accents they choose to emphasize, it becomes this complex maze of hard-hitting synth stabs and pounding drums. It actually really reminds me of another classic goth dance record from the same year, Depeche Mode's Violator, specifically the opening World in My Eyes, which by the way is a 10. Tormentor is just like that song in that it's a well-oiled machine with an abundance of instruments and effects all intertwining to build the track. This is much more malevolent though, with the warped, menacing synth choices. Each one seems to have its own flavor of horror that it brings to the table. At the same time though, the grooves they're creating with those synths are so damn dancey that it really makes you want to do the goth sway to it. Nivek Ogre's snarl is less abrasive on this song. I love his vocals here actually that go from hushed and tense to more of an uproar depending on how the song ebbs and flows. And his lyrics seem to be bits and pieces of the distorted perception of a self-destructing person. A lot of broken up illusions that really fit the sound of the song but once again avoid a specific meaning. I'm gonna have to give this a solid 9. I love this song so much. The one thing that holds it back for me is that it's a bit too self-similar over its length, which causes it to lose a bit of momentum by the end. But you could easily argue back that industrial is supposed to be repetitive and self-similar, so that's barely a critique. And it's so genius in every other respect that as soon as it's over, I want to start it again. It represents the most accessible aspects of this record, if you can call them that, while still holding true to the apocalyptic visions that the early industrial bands like Throbbing Gristle wanted to get across. Track 3 is called Spasmolytic. I love these titles, man. Lyrically, this song is full of vivid and scary allusions to heroin abuse, and claustrophobia is the word that comes to mind to describe the music itself. The beginning fades in and you find yourself in another whirlpool of gnashing electronic sounds. Ogre's voice comes in, way too close up in the mix for comfort. I'll try to do my best impression of it. Making time in a low-rent high-rise. No place to go. Downtown. As soon as he says that, the drums come in. A real drum set for the first time on the record, I believe. And it's playing sort of a hushed blast beat. I don't know drumming terms, I'm sorry. It's like a 16th note blast beat pattern, but more similar to something you'd hear in jazz than metal. Coupled with the drums are chromatic synth stabs, eschewing all melody in exchange for twisted intensity. This is basically like an electronic industrial jazz piece. It's really cool. Over this tight, immediate instrumental, Ogre snarls out a story of a heroin addict going into the city to get his fix, using short, violent language to great effect here. There are so many great one-liners on this song that speak to the depraved mindset of an addict. The drums alternate between that blast beat pattern and a more standard but still aggressive 4/4 pattern, and the synths stay consistently impossible to pin down, like you're twisting and looping on some kind of evil theme park ride. This is such a potent song in every way. It'll probably be too much for most people, but coming from an addict, it's an incredibly accurate musical representation of the insanity and hatred you experience being trapped inside the machine of addiction. So close to giving this a perfect score, but once again, the only thing that holds me back is that it's a bit too self-similar, so that initial shock and fear just isn't gripping you as hard by the end. Maybe they could have made it shorter or added an interlude or something, I don't know. But so much urgency and anger is being transmitted through the effort of the whole band to make this pathological state of mind come to life. This is another 9 for me. The first half of this record is so strong, it's seriously one of the best track lineups in the whole industrial genre. Unfortunately, that streak is broken by track 4, Rash Reflection. This song is another hellscape of twirling electronics underpinned by a rickety beat that is honestly a bit simplistic and drab, definitely compared to the previous songs. It's a very flat 4/4 cadence without much interplay between the other instruments. And for whatever reason, the main loop that runs for basically the whole song has an out-of-tune synth part that sounds like a creaky revolving door going around and around every measure. It is completely nauseating. I cannot listen to it without feeling ill. Any upside to these main sections are drowned out by that disgusting synth. And to be honest, there really isn't that much else to report in terms of scary effects or like an edge to this. This track is confusing to say the least. The lyrics, which are apparently about the Rajneesh movement, Movement, a criminal religious cult run by Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh that operated out of Oregon in the 80s, are pretty good. I think the repeated line, "kiss the master's feet," is a creepy way to summarize a cult. But since I literally can't listen to the main loop of this song without wanting to throw myself out a window, I'm gonna have to give this a 2. This is not good. I don't know what Skinny Puppy was going for here. I am so confused. There isn't much of an idea for a song, really, other than that creaky door and a less than stellar beat. I think with records this abrasive, there's always a danger that the sounds can go from ultra cathartic to ultra annoying. They're walking a thin line here where the payoffs can be big, but the missteps really sting and stink. Completely confused as to why this track is here. It really only acts as a road bump for the incredible momentum that this record starts out with. But track 5, Nature's Revenge, is such a massive jerk backward toward brilliance that I got whiplash. I'm sure you've noticed by now that the bread and butter of this record is creating hellish beat-driven vortexes of winding drums and synths. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that this track is the quintessential example of what this album does. This could stand on its own as a showcase of the vision that the band had for this project. The intersections of the monstrous beat and the menacing percussive synths is the core of this song's movement. It is very danceable, like I'm sure this was getting a lot of play at goth clubs in the early 90s. Paired together with that foundation are a variety of darkly atmospheric synths bearing down on you, morphing across the length of the song like a pit of shifting shadows. Clean guitar chords are woven in at certain points, which beautifully contrasts the extreme darkness with a couple rays of light, and the gloomy bass solo that pops in around the 120 mark is incredible, bending and weaving through the mix so effortlessly. There are so many amazing bits over this full runtime that it would take forever to explain them all, and I don't think that's really necessary. All you need to know is that it blurs together into an unholy symphony that really feels universal in scope. I feel like I'm Guts at the Eclipse, witnessing the God Hand for the first time, learning the true horrific nature of reality. You could easily replace Susumu Hirasawa's soundtrack from that scene in the 1997 Berserk anime with this song, and it would work seamlessly. I would not be surprised at all to learn that this album inspired that OST. The lyrics are abstract, but seem to be describing some kind of storm, which the narrator is terrified of and desperate to escape from. You can't quite tell what's going to happen, which, like I said before, is so much better than if it was outright stated. Ogre is using a psychotic drawl on this song that sounds to me like his mind has been broken. He has a different inflection on almost every song of this project, and each one mirrors the flow and feeling of a given track. It's hard to describe, but very intuitive showmanship there. There's also a soundbite that plays about halfway through from the 1989 movie Communion, and the dialogue goes, "Scared? You really are? I'm not scared. What are you?" God, my existential dread is spiking. I hate that, actually. A 10 is the only proper score for this because there is nothing that this set out to do that it doesn't brilliantly succeed at. It's so all-encompassing, it almost doesn't feel like it has a beginning or an end to it. In my imagination, it's still unfolding in some dark dimension of the universe, playing out for all time, and this is just the sliver of it we happen to hear. There's a Lovecraftian majesty to it, which isn't coincidental. Lovecraft was confirmed by the band to be an inspiration for the album artwork and for some of the songs. One of the best industrial tracks ever, Halloween Incarnate. This has to be the most Halloween-sounding album of all time. Not the Jack Skellington kind of Halloween, though, the kind that legitimately wants to kill you. This is a spooky masterpiece, and the best example of what this record does best. Track 6 is called Shorelined Poison. Foreboding synths and tortured electronics start off this track before the band hits you with a massive drum groove that sounds like Aha took Datura. And it has this sick little pause in it that is so damn funky, actually. However, the song takes an unexpected turn when these loud 80s string synths come in that are like overdriven to the max, and Nivek Ogre is like yelling over the top of it. Does the band know that they're clipping here? Or better question, do they care? This synth does sound like it's clipping a lot, which if you don't know means a waveform is being overdriven beyond the point that an amplifier can handle. It makes a clip sound grainy and unclear. Seems like the band got a little bit too gung-ho with the volume. Lil Jon would be upset, but I think they need to turn down. This is a very loudly mixed album in general, and here I think it gets too loud for its own good. After the 2-minute mark though, the rest of the song is pretty clear. This track has all the elements this album is known for, the haunting synths, the rending vortex-like environment. There's some ghoulish howling in there at one point that makes my skin crawl, but it feels like kind of an unfocused mix of those elements though. Other than that blistering beat, there isn't a ton of really memorable things that stick with you after listening to this. Ogre is spitting truth on the lyrics, though. It's unsurprisingly a scathing commentary of human impact on the environment. Screamed statements like "waste the given gift" and "life given river deformed" could penetrate the heart of the coldest oil tycoon. The imagery is very cutting. Once again, it's that jagged sort of writing that alludes to man-made horrors beyond our comprehension and the consequences of our carbon footprint. It is a good reminder, since this is the most important issue for the future of our species. Remember to recycle. This track is pretty cool. I'm gonna give it a 6. If I was listening to this record all the way through, I'd be head bobbing to it without a care, despite it trying to rupture my ears at one point. It's nothing mind-blowing for me. It's just like the basics of what this album has to offer. Track 7 is called Grave Wisdom. Punny name. Skinny Puppy never losing that sense of humor, even when they're making Cthulhu's personal theme music. The song starts out with a 4/4 kick drum of a drum machine with some mechanical hi-hats. It's a dead ringer for an 80s dance track. And then the main synth melody comes in, which I love actually. Is kind of a forlorn minor melody, the first vaguely pretty thing you hear on this whole record, which immediately gets destroyed as Ogre comes in with a deadpan growl on another tirade about pollution and the downfall of humanity. That same minor melody continues behind him, but now the setting on the keyboard has been replaced with a more spooky sounding synth, and unfortunately it's more spooky in a Michael Jackson sort of way than anything really unnerving. This is the major moment where the record really sounds like the 80s. It's those MIDI strings. There's some orchestra hits in there too, which if you don't know is like the 80s encapsulated in a sound. Electric guitars jut in and out of the mix. Some 16th note drumming enters in as the song ramps up, which complements the beat very well. All tied together with computerized 16th note synths. It's another whirlwind composed of shards of industrial dance and metal, just with less bite than the rest of the record. Don't really like the vocal part on this track. It's kind of just follows wherever the spooky sounding synth goes, and then when it can't do that, just like sticks to the root note of the song. And I don't know why, but the band is coming off sort of preachy this time. Maybe because it feels like it's trying to be more accessible as a dance track and less aggressive than Shoreline Poison or really anything else on this album. They could be scaring my socks off with more intense, insane music, but instead they decided to remake We Are the World. Okay, it's not that bad, but I'm gonna give this a 4. You can't win them all, even on a record this strong, and this is possibly the most tepid effort here. A bit outdated, the only song that really crosses that line for me, and just not as raw as the rest of the record. The next song is track 8, entitled TFWO, which if you're wondering stands for Totally Fucking Weirded Out. This one is strange and kind of cool. It's a punk song. It's got a standard punk beat, the The metal guitars are chugging along with the bass, except it's mixed exactly the same way as the rest of the album. So all the instruments are still EQ'd in the same places they would be if the band was still making industrial dance music. That means the thunderous metal guitars are placed way in the background, and the beat is extremely huge and up front. It's a very bizarre sound, kind of sounds like Misfits went electro. Even the vocal melody in the chorus is totally punk. Sounds exactly like Dr. Feelgood by Motley Crue. I'm just now realizing that. It's the same tritone there, which historically has been referred to as the devil's chord. In addition to being produced like the rest of the album, it has all the other characteristics of this record. There are layered drum tracks using a drum machine and normal drums fused together. There's the same creepy machine noises and post-production warping of the mix. So it ends up sounding like another blizzard of beats and synths, but just with a punk bass this time. The ending is completely insane. The song breaks itself down as the instruments go in all sorts of disturbing directions. It sounds like the evil computer that this song is inside of went haywire. I am totally fucking weirded out. I'm gonna give this one a decent 5. It's an interesting idea to make a punk song into an electro-industrial song. The two genres are pretty aligned in terms of the subculture and general ethos. I think the band noticed the similarities and just decided to go with it. But it's not a super inventive punk song in terms of the notes themselves. We aren't remaking Black Flag here. It's a pretty standard punk song structure, and the emphasis is on the production being interesting and disorienting. As far as the vocals, not the best in my opinion. Nivek Ogre's voice is pretty nasally, and he kind of needs space for you to hear the gravel underneath it. And in this fast-paced punk context, it sort of gets drowned out and ends up just sounding like a stream of nasal, a stream of nays. The execution could have been better in my opinion, but this is a fun moment on the project nonetheless. But we are back to hell with the next song, which has a fittingly ominous title, Morpheus Laughing. The kind of title that you would expect for a song that is as labyrinthine as this. It's pointless to try to describe this in sections because there aren't really any, as is the case for most of the songs on this record. So I'll just describe the elements of it. This song has a 4/4 beat, but the winding synths and elusive vocal accents make it so that you can barely tell. So it sheds any shreds of danciness that it had in the first place and becomes eerily hypnotic. You don't want to move to it, you get lost in it. The minor, high-pitched echoing synth, I don't know what else to call it, that starts the song off and runs throughout is as close to Halloween as you can possibly get. I heard the first few seconds of it and instantly put it on my Halloween playlist, which I have year-round. Yeah, I'm a pretty spooky guy. The synth pad that paints the background is haunting, and so is the Halloween echoing synth. It all has a mystique to it that's somehow enchanting, but also mechanical. Although the prettiness fades and returns as the song delves into heavier crescendos as it ebbs and flows. And the polyrhythmic drum machine, with its off-kilter beat and clinking hi-hats, enhances the wandering feeling. The resulting feeling you get from all this is wandering lost and scared in a dark mechanical dystopia. I love it. It reaches to something primal in me, some kind of need to survive in this hellscape they're creating. I don't know why, but I like that feeling. This is for people who like that feeling. Ogre is great on this song. He alternates between his low, menacing rasp and raising his voice depending on what the song needs. Like I've said, he has a knack for feeling out how to deliver his vocals across the different landscapes of this album, and it feels like he fits as the voice of this chaos. This track is a 9 for me. It's such an interesting spin on their formula, taking it almost into an elegant direction. I said almost because calling this band elegant is like calling the Grim Reaper sexy. It makes no sense, but here it's very nearly true at some points. It's the most complicated piece on the project, and that complexity really pays off. It leaves you hopeless and far from home in its maze of torment. Good Morbid Angel song, by the way. Finally, we are at the last song, which is a culmination of all the horrors of this record, and it is titled Reclamation. This track plays out like a ceremony or a dark ritual. There are triumphant drums, regal synths that waver between majestic major chords and terrifying minor disarray. Ogre is chanting above the din with so much distortion on his voice that he sounds like some kind of monster. And what comes to mind again, because I have a pathological obsession with it, is the eclipse from Berserk. You have been given the brand of sacrifice, and the hordes of apostles are celebrating in their vast numbers, preparing to devour their human offering. That is what I'm getting from this. The drumming and chanting grow more and more hysterical. It feels like the band know they have just created their greatest work with this record and felt they should end it with a proper celebration of the demons. I was on the fence about rating this because it is essentially just a single instrumental crescendo, but it is 3 minutes in length and has a considerable amount of complexity to it, so I'm going to give it a score. For what it is, this is an 8 to me. It's the kind of ending that I would envision an album like this to have. It's well crafted, very climactic, and the cherry on top of the demonic sundae that they've served up with this project. A project that in my opinion deserves a lot more attention since it stands as one of the classics of the early 90s. Because this Skinny Puppy record is the greatest album of all time. Thanks for watching, bye.